Hey, Paul.
Hi, Cyrill.
Hey. So, yeah, thanks for taking the time. And I want to introduce you to everybody. Paul Watson, we met in 2012. You pretty much made us, not really made us, but inspired us to start Parley. And I just want to dive first. And I'm Cyrill from Parley, founder. And I want to start first and diving into the state of the ocean. Like, Paul, why should we worry? Why should we think about protecting the sea? You mentioned in your video, you mentioned in the statement around Spaceship Earth, you mentioned that we are killing off the crew. And with that, we are taking away the life support system that allows us to be here. How do you mean that?
Well, for years I've been saying that if the ocean dies, we all die. And there's a truth in that. And for instance, phytoplankton provides 70% of the oxygen in the air. And since 1950, there's been a 40% diminishment in phytoplankton populations. And the reason for that is there's been a diminishment in marine mammals, whales, dolphins, and also seabirds. And those particular animals provide the nutrient base for the phytoplankton, that is the nitrogen and the iron. Like every day, one blue whale defecates 3 tons of manure and heavily rich in nitrogen and iron, and literally makes whales the farmers of the ocean. So there's a very complex interdependence of within ecosystems, and we're messing around with that complexity. So I like to compare it to a spaceship. On this incredible trip around the Milky Way galaxy, and every spaceship has a life support system. And that life support system provides the air we breathe and the food we eat and regulates climate, temperature. And that life support system is run by a crew of Earthlings, not us humans. We're just passengers having a wonderful time, amusing ourselves. But the crew, and what we're doing is we're killing the crew. The bees and the trees and the worms and the fish and the phytoplankton, we're killing them. There's only so many crew members that you can remove from that life support system before the system begins to fall apart and collapses. And so that's really what we're the state that we're looking at now.
So when you're looking at how it started for you, that was a while ago, right? I mean, you became an environmentalist like really, really early on, like more or less fighting for beavers when you were like a teenager, right?
Well, I don't know if I understood myself to be an environmentalist. I just began at 11 years old rescuing beavers from traps and other animals from the trap lines and destroying the trap lines. So I was 11. And then I sort of, was concerned about protection of wildlife. And then in 1969, I became one of the co-founders of the Greenpeace Foundation. I was the youngest member. And I left Greenpeace in '77 to set up Sea Shepherd because I felt there was a need for.
So when you started, sorry for interrupting you. So let's go back to that moment. You started, you were co-founder, founding member, you were friends with Bob Hunter, and you did a lot of things back then. For example, you had defended seals, and this is like a famous picture where you are in front of a big sealing ship, like a seal hunter ship or a facility out there, risking your life. You want to speak about that incident? You want to speak about that early age moment where you put your life in front of these animals?
In 1975, I organized the Greenpeace campaign to protect the seals, and then we went out on the ice in March of March of '76. And one of the tactics that we used was just to block the movement of the sealing vessels. So this is Bob Hunter and I blocking one of the Norwegian sealing vessels in the ice, and we stopped it, and we rescued the seals that were in front of it. It was a symbolic thing, really, because they're killing hundreds of thousands of seals, and we rescued a few, but it certainly got the message across. And
message across means that there was media involved. I think
there's always
media and what you called back then mind bombs, like putting the light on things that people would probably not know and not see, was pretty much your mechanism, right?
Well, there's always media. I mean, it's no accident that Greenpeace was founded by journalists and broadcasters, communications majors like that. It was a media organization. So we understood very, very early that the media was something that was extremely important, and that the camera was probably the most, influential weapon that's ever been invented.
So another mission or another operation that you did back then, I think it was the first whaling campaign, right? When you went after Russian whalers. And again, there you put your life, or the crew, you all put your life in front of whales to protect them. which is quite a dangerous thing to do. And it was quite dangerous, but you had I would say you had an encounter with a mammal that showed you that these animals actually notice you and see a difference between humans that want to kill them and humans that actually want to protect them.
Yeah, it was June in 1975, and we come up with this idea to protect whales by putting our bodies between the harpoons and the whales. And we went out in search of the Soviet whaling fleet. We found it 60 miles off the coast of California. This was before the 200-mile limit. And Bob Hunter and I were in a small boat, and our first tactic was to get in front of that harpoon vessel, which we did. And there we were in front of a harpoon vessel that was bearing down on us at about 21 knots. And in front of us, there were 8 magnificent sperm whales that were fleeing for their life. And every time the harpooner tried to get a shot, I would maneuver the boat to block that shot. And this worked for about 20 minutes until the captain on the Soviet vessel came running down the catwalk and screamed into the ear of the harpooner, then looked down on us, smiled, and brought his finger across his throat. And that's when I realized that we were in deep trouble. But we held our position, and a few moments later there was an enormous explosion, and the harpoon flew over our head, slammed into the backside of one of the females in that pod, and she screamed, rolled on her side in a fountain of blood, and suddenly the largest whale in the pod rose up and slapped the water with his tail and dove and swam right underneath of us and threw himself straight at the bow of the Soviet vessel. But they were waiting for him, and with another unattached harpoon, and the harpooner pulled the trigger, hit him point blank in the head, and that whale fell back screaming and rolling about in agony. And as he did so, I caught his eye, and he looked straight at us. Then he dove, and I saw a trail of bloody bubbles coming at us real fast. And he came up and out of the water at an angle so that the next move would be to fall straight on top of us. And as his head rose up out of the water, I was looking into his eye. I could see my own reflection in his eye. I was that close. And he could have very easily come forward and crushed us, but instead I saw him make an effort to pull himself back, and he began to slide back into the sea, and his eye disappeared beneath the surface, and he died. Could have killed us and chose not to do so. So personally, I feel indebted to that whale for the fact that I was still alive. But also, as we sat there in the midst of the Soviet whaling fleet, as the sun was going down, I said to myself, why are they killing these whales? You didn't kill sperm whales to eat them. You killed them for sperm oils, and especially spermaceti oil, which is highly prized for industrialized equipment. And one of the things that it was really highly prized for was the development and manufacturing of intercontinental ballistic missiles. So I said, here we are destroying this incredibly beautiful, complex, intelligent, social, sentient creature for the purpose of making a weapon meant for the mass extermination of human beings. And that's when it struck me. We're insane. And we're ecologically insane. And from that moment on, I said to myself, I don't do what I do for people. I do what I do for them. That's why I'm here.
So that was for you pretty much the end of protest, right? You became a law enforcement organization, and you started Sea Shepherd a while later, correct?
Yes, I set it up as an interventionist in organizations, an anti-poaching organization, did that in '77. Greenpeace is a protest organization, and it's involved with a lot of environmental issues, nuclear power, everything else. But we focus on marine wildlife conservation and also interception and enforcement.
So one of the first ships that you, I would say, demilitarized and took the weapons down and actually dismantled the whole ship was a notorious pirate whaler, right? The Sierra. You want to speak quickly? I pulled up the photo. I hope it's the right one. What is the story of the Sierra?
We left Boston in July of '79 to hunt down the pirate whaler Sierra. It was the most notorious of the outlaw whalers that was out there. And we had no idea of where it was, somewhere between the north coast of Portugal and halfway down to Angola. And so I set out to find out. My strategy was to start at the top and work my way down. But 14 days out of Boston, we came upon the Sierra. It was 200 miles off the coast, and it was moving south, and we were moving east. So we intercepted that course line, which was just more miraculous. And they saw us, and they began to run, and they began to run back into a Portuguese port, the port of Leixões. And we chased them. And I could have taken action out. We were faster than them, but I didn't want to take any action against them because those seas were very rough, and I didn't want to risk killing anybody. So we chased the Sierra into the port, And now I had a problem. To take that vessel out, I had to do it in Portuguese water, therefore subject to Portuguese law. So I called my crew together. There was 20 of us on the boat, and I said, look, we're going to go out and ram that boat, disable it, and end its career. And I can't say you're not going to get hurt, but I can guarantee that you're going to go to jail in Portugal if you come with me. So you got 10 minutes to make a decision, pack your bags, get off the ship. And 10 minutes later, 17 of the 20 were off the ship. And fortunately, the two guys who stayed were my chief engineer, Peter Wolf, and my third engineer, Jerry Duran. And we pulled away from the dock, went across the harbor, straight at the Sierra, full speed, gave them a warning blow by striking them across the bow, also to destroy the harpoon, came around 360 degrees, slammed into the side of the Sierra, cut it open to the water line, and then they started their engines from dead stop to full speed ahead and burned out the bearings in their engines. And then we left the harbor and we were chased by a Portuguese destroyer. We were caught and brought back, and I was brought before the port captain and charged with gross criminal negligence. And I said to the captain, there wasn't anything negligent about what we did. We hit that ship exactly where we intended to do it, so it wasn't negligent. And the captain said, well, he laughed and he said, but the other problem is I can't figure out who owns that ship. And until I figure out who owns that ship, you're free to go. So as I left the port captain's office, a couple of my crew members were there. And one of them said, well, if I knew you were going to get away with it, I would have been there too. Well, sometimes you got to do things knowing there's, you jump into the fire knowing there's no way out. And it's incredible how many times we've done that and actually came out unscathed on the other side.
So some people would not have the courage to do so, and you experienced that you pretty much survived all these situations, even when you risked your life or went into a situation where there was no out, there was no exit strategy. That's pure courage. And on the other hand, some people would say, you guys are damaging property, you're very controversial. But on the other hand, you have supporters from a very unexpected angle, and that is this guy, for example. And the photo doesn't really fit on here. Dalai Lama.
The Dalai Lama. Yeah.
Well, so you would suddenly have him sending you a message and say, more or less supporting you in your actions and your choice of methods.
I established a strategy when I began Sea Shepherd called aggressive nonviolence. That we would be aggressive, but we would never hurt anybody. And in 42 years, we never have. I had, back in, I think it was 1985, I had a Tibetan Buddhist monk come to the ship in Seattle, and he gave me this little statuette and wooden thing that was carved. It had it was like a horse and a dragon combined.
Like this size-ish, right?
About 6 inches. And he said to put it up on the mast and bring good fortune. And I didn't know what it is, but you don't argue with a Tibetan Buddhist monk who's asked you to put something up on the mast. Why? What couldn't hurt? What the hell? So I did. And in '89, I had the opportunity to meet with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and I showed him a picture of it, and I asked him what it was, and he laughed, and I found out he actually had sent it to us. And I said, well, what is it? And he says, it's called Hayagriva. And I said, well, what is that? He says, well, it's a compassionate aspect of the wrath of the Buddha. And I said, well, what does that mean? He says, well, you never want to hurt anybody, but sometimes when they cannot see enlightenment, you scare the hell out of them until they do. So he understood what we were trying to do. So I believe that our approach is nonviolent. It's very nonviolent, and that we've never caused an injury to any sentient being ever. And but we get things done by being aggressive. It's a new approach.
So when you look at other operations, for example, more like a current one, Chasing the Thunder is the film around that one. Can you describe how you also now changed from being this group that does everything alone, beginning with a simple small boat and then working your way up to a fleet, but now really collaborating with intergovernment organizations, other governments? And I think that the whole Thunder Operation Icefish is a good example for that, how you evolved from back in the 70s to now.
Well, when we first began, we were like a vigilante organization, and I realized quite quickly that although we had the will to do this, we didn't have really the authority to do it. Of course, outside of 200 miles, who does have any authority? But inside the the territorial limits of countries. Those countries have the authority. We started this in 1999 when I approached the Galapagos National Park, and we started a partnership with the Galapagos National Park and the government of Ecuador, the Ministry of the Environment. And for now, it's good 20 years now, we've been involved in that partnership in protecting the Galapagos Marine Reserve, providing patrol boats, setting up an AIS system, canine unit, stopping poachers for 2 decades there. But in 2015, when we went after the Iceland, the toothfish fleets down off the coast of Antarctica, we realized that the governments had been unable to do anything about that down there. Australia, New Zealand, there's a lack of economic and political will to intervene.
Why is that, do you think?
Well, because there's no gain for anybody, Yeah. So what goes on in international waters is whatever anybody wants to do. Really, we have all the laws and treaties and everything we need, but lack of enforcement.
Just lacks of somebody going out there and catching the villains.
Well, we could do it if we wanted to, because we certainly do this when it comes to drugs. So they could very much do it when it comes to wildlife. But again, there's a lack of initiative, lack of motivation. So when we said, okay, we're going to go out after the toothfish fleets in the Southern Ocean, we were immediately attacked by the Australian government, for example, saying how we had no authority to do that, even though they weren't doing anything. And
but it's not their boats out there. I mean, it's not them fishing, right?
No, there was 8 boats out there. They're all illegally registered boats. They had nothing to do with Australia. But Australia lays claim, they say it's the Australian treaty area, their territory, even though nobody recognizes that. We do, but nobody else seems to. Japan certainly doesn't. So anyway, we decided to go after them. Australia even threatened to charge us with illegal fishing if we seized any of this their net in that. So anyway, and also they said we'd never be able to find them, and if we did, well, we couldn't do anything. But after 8 days from leaving Australia and our other vessel leaving New Zealand, we found them. We found the Thunder, the most notorious of the 6. Peter Hammerstead was...
Like a vessel with like 20 crew or 30 crew, or how big is that boat?
42 crew on there, over 200 feet, and the Captain Peter Hammerstead of the Bob Barker found them, and as soon as they saw the Bob Barker, they dropped their net and ran. And it was a pursuit that became the longest pursuit in maritime history, a 110-day chase from the coast of Antarctica up into the Indian Ocean, then down around the Cape of Good Hope and up to equatorial West Africa. After 110 days, with the Thunder running out of fuel and no place to go, because during the chase, Nigeria revoked their flag. They had nowhere to go. So,
but they couldn't go to port anymore, pretty much.
If they went to port, if they went to port, they would have been arrested. And because during this chase, we developed a partnership with Interpol that was helping us, following us. We brought the other thing is the Sam Simon following behind was given the coordinates, picked up the net, and it took 200 hours to pull 72 kilometers of 70 tons of net out of the.
So that was the gill net that the poachers left behind when they escaped, and it was still sitting there, and your team, the crew, did pretty much dragged it in with a homemade wrench, right? I mean, it was like pretty much like a manual effort to get that net in, and it was 72 kilometers long. Is that right?
It was, and also the Sam Simon was 1,000 miles away from the Bob Barker, searching for other vessels. And so the Bob Barker, when it started the chase, left the coordinates where the buoys could be found. And the Sam Simon, it took about a week to get there. Well, actually 4 days to get there. And then they began to pull that net in. And so they spent the 200 hours pulling that net in. Then they brought that net to Mauritius, where it was the Mauritius police working with Interpol came to get evidence on that net. Meanwhile, the chase is still going on. And then the Sam Simon actually caught up with the Bob Barker. So we had 2 vessels chasing the Bob Barker. And finally, in April in 2015, the captain of the Bob Barker, with nowhere to go, decided to sink his own ship to destroy the evidence. And so,
and your people were close by and observed it all and filmed it and broadcasted it, correct?
Yeah, close by, and also they put out a mayday, so we were prepared to rescue the crew, which we did. But he sank the vessel to destroy the evidence. But he was very reluctant to leave the ship himself, and we kept saying, we're not going to rescue your crew until everybody's off that boat, because we don't know what you're going to do. Finally, he left, and as the ship was sinking, 3 of our crew boarded the Thunder and gathered the evidence: cell phones, logbooks, charts, computers, and that evidence was very instrumental in sending them to prison. The captain got 3 years in prison, and the 2 of the officers got 2 years in prison, plus the company got fined 17 million euros. And the ship sank in 3,000 feet of water, and no, excuse me, 8,000 feet of water. Wow. And then we brought the Sam Simon brought the crew to Cape Verde, or San Tome, where they were charged and arrested and put in prison there. When
you see your team or the crew going into a sinking boat that where any minute it could go under with it, that's a lot of danger, right? I mean, don't you feel these moments that oh my God, are they coming back? Or do you really 100% believe that it will always end good?
Well, I was quite confident they'd get off. I mean, a ship doesn't sink like immediately in most cases. It took hours for the Thunder to sink. You know, when the Titanic sank, it took like 10 hours or something for it to sink. So ships don't sink that immediately, and you can start to feel it. So I think they were very cautious. They were only on board for 15 minutes. But they could have gotten off at any time. In fact, they probably could have stretched it out longer. But I think they were being both cautious and actually efficient at the same time. The one thing I wanted them to do, but of course they didn't have time to do, is to strap a GoPro camera to the bow so we could watch film it and have it relayed back so we could film it going underwater. But anyway, the Thunder's career was ended. But here's what's even more important, is that the other 5 vessels, because of this, were apprehended in Malaysia, in Thailand, and Cape Verde, and have all been shut down. So we shut down all of the illegal poaching vessels in the Southern Ocean in a matter of 6 months. And
you got quite a fleet there for a private navy. You got a lot of vessels by now. I mean, there's a very super fast the Sam Simon. Then there's an even faster that we're seeing here in front. Probably want to talk a bit about the Brigitte Bardot. It was a racing boat, I guess, once. But by now you have boats pretty much all over the world. You want to speak about that?
Yeah, we have right now we have the Sam Simon, which is a former Japanese research vessel, and it's in France, having just finished a campaign to protect dolphins in the Bay of Biscay. The Bob Barker is presently in the Canary Islands. What the problem is because of the COVID-19 thing, the boats have, once they get in port, they can't leave port. They're all forcefully quarantined. The Brigitte Bardot is in Mazatlan in Mexico. Just come back from going after surveying Chinese vessels in the Eastern Tropical Pacific. The Sharpie and the Parley are 2 former U.S. Coast Guard patrol vessels, and they're right now in La Paz in Mexico, and in Baja, and they're involved with the protection of the endangered vaquita. If it wasn't for our last 5 years in the Sea of Cortez, the vaquita would now be extinct.
So that's the next thing I wanted to talk with you about, Sea of Cortez, Mexico. That's quite a complex scenario there, where you have poachers, actually fishermen, collaborating with international organized crime organizations, pretty much, who sell, I think, the bladder of these fish to a market in China. And the side effect when they are going for the Tatoba is that they're killing with their nets a very rare species, the vaquita, right, where you have around 20 left on this planet now. But it's not that they are killing these animals with any intentional purpose. It's pretty much like a side effect. Still, it's extremely rough, because there are like hundreds of fishermen out there throwing in these nets, and you and your fleet pretty much like try to get these nets out and protect these animals that are on their way into extinction.
Well, the totoaba is an endangered species, but it's one of the most valuable fish on the planet, because the swim bladder, just the swim bladder, that's all they want, is worth about $25,000 a kilo in China. And that kind of money motivates the same kind of people who are the cartels that are pushing the drugs in Mexico. Now, they're not targeting the vaquita, but the vaquita get caught in the gill nets that they set. And what our job is to protect the vaquita refuge, the area set aside for the vaquita, and keep the poachers out. So over the last 5 years, we've confiscated about 1,200 nets all total. That's about almost 150,000 meters in nets in total. And I'm quite confident the vaquita would be extinct if it wasn't for that. And of course, it's a dangerous campaign. We've had Molotov cocktails thrown at us. We've been shot at. We've had 3 drones shot down. But we're working in partnership with the Mexican government and the Mexican Navy. And it's been very, very successful.
So another area which is like not Mexico, it's actually Faroe Island. Quite a famous one for you. You have been there, I think, I don't know how many years, but for a long, long, long time. And there it seems to be a tradition that not only fishermen, but pretty much the whole population goes out and they grind whales. I mean, they slaughter whales, and then families come and see this spectacle of blood. And it's pretty much like, it seems to be ingrained in their culture. But you're not giving up. You're not giving up that this can be ended there, right? You want to speak about that?
Well, sometimes it takes decades to win these things. It took us a long time to end the commercial seal hunt in Canada. It still has sealing, but we've destroyed the markets. And we got to just keep the pressure on the Faroe Islands. It's not called, they're not grinding well. What the word means, grindadrap. Okay. The grind is the whale, and it literally means, grindadrap means the murder of the whale. Drap is Old Nordic for murder. And this isn't done for commercial reasons. It's done because it's some sort of tradition, and everybody gets all hyped up and drops whatever they're doing to go out and kill any pilot whale pod that swims by. It's sort of they don't go out and target them. They're just, if they come close, they go after them. And as you can see, the ocean fills up with blood. People get drunk. Children are involved. The whole thing's totally obscene. There's no place quite like it.
Super barbarian. I saw people on your photos. I saw people with drilling machines or like iron rods and things like that. So it's not like just a gentle way of killing, which there is probably none, but it's a very rude way of taking life.
It's often compared to the killing of the dolphins in Taiji, Japan, with the difference being in Taiji, Japan, there's a commercial motivation. They're going after the dolphins to sell to sea aquariums, which is pretty bad. And, you know, the death toll there is pretty high. But in this case, it's a sport hunt. It's done for pleasure. There's no other way to describe it. By law, they're not allowed to eat more than 200 grams of whale meat every month because of the high concentration of PCBs and mercury. But they do it. But they do anyway. But even so, if you take the population of the Faroe Islands, 45,000, and divide it into how many whales they kill, it's like kilos of whale meat. So what happens is after they kill the whales, they put the whale meat in the freezer. They kill more whales and they take the whale meat out of the freezer and throw it away and put the new stuff in. Also, we found places where they dump entire carcasses, weigh them down and sink them in the ocean. And we filmed that underwater, all the carcasses being on the bottom of the water. We've also filmed them dumping entire whales over the cliffs and into the sea. So they don't kill them for food. They kill them for sport. And also you have to keep in mind the Faroe Islands have the highest per capita income of any place in Europe. They are not poor people. There's no such thing as poverty in the Faroe Islands. They have a very lucrative fishing industry, both commercial fishing and salmon farming fishing. I actually believe that some of the whale meat's actually fed to the salmon on the salmon farms. But and so that's one of the reasons we're trying to encourage people to boycott Faroese salmon. But also also boycotting tourism and all such and such thing. We have to put that kind of pressure on it. It's a barbaric, savage, perverse pastime. And I do not believe that you can justify any sport by causing pain and suffering to any sentient being. And they said, well, what about the bullfighter? Well, you know, people always say this. What about this? What about that? They're all bad. They're all very bad. Do they think we support the bullfighter? Do they think we support fox hunting because we're opposed to that? No, we're not. We oppose it all. But Sea Shepherd is a marine conservation organization, so we focus on the marine beings.
When you're looking at the environmental movement, yes, there are activists like you that go out, that pretty much investigate, that document, that share the terror. But then there are also like artists or creatives. I mean, there are it's such a wide variety of people living on this planet. And you speak about the biodiversity of a movement, and you think the strength of a movement lays in its biodiversity. What role do you think can a creator, can an inventor, can an artist, a designer take when it comes to this movement? besides going out on a boat and fighting with your person, like with your body and with your heart on the front line?
Well, I wouldn't use the word biodiversity in that term, but I would say the strength of an ecosystem is on diversity within that ecosystem. That's where the strength lies. So the strength of a movement lies in diversity. So whether that approach be education, legislation, litigation, or direct action, it doesn't really matter as long as people use their passion, their courage, their imagination to find solutions to make it a better world. So it doesn't really matter what that approach is. It all works complementary with each other. So that's what we encourage. We don't expect everybody to go out and track down whaling boats and take those kind of risks. But a lot of things can be achieved through other means. As I said at the beginning, the most powerful weapon ever invented has been the camera. So it's media that is important in order to get your message across. The reason that we put together a TV show called Whale Wars was because we wanted to reach millions of people, and the only way to do that is through the camera and on television.
There were a lot of films coming out lately. One was this guy here, How to Change the World, which is pretty much the beginning of Greenpeace, but also the beginning of Sea Shepherd, like this whole story that is very interlinked with yours. Then there is this movie, Chasing the Thunder, Ocean Warriors, it's called, or Chasing the Thunder, I'm not even sure anymore, which is the title, but one of these two. And it's all about the pursuit of the thunder. And then a very good movie that just came out as well is called Watson, which pretty much portrays you and your journey from back then until now. When you're looking at everyone who's watching these films, everyone who's watching an interview like this, what's the one thing that you feel people can all do, even if they can't dedicate their whole life to become an activist?
Well, everybody can be an activist. It's just what kind of an activist. You can be an activist if you're a teacher. You can be an activist if you're a lawyer or a writer or a filmmaker or an artist. All activism. That's what activism is getting involved and sending a message. And so, what I did with Watson was actually put together by Leslie Chilcott, who did the film Inconvenient Truth with Al Gore. So I knew she would do a good job. And what I think the film does is aiming at inspiring young people to understand that each and every one of us can make a difference. That, don't depend upon governments for solutions. Governments cause problems. They don't solve problems, never have, never will. Every single social movement in history, governments didn't solve it. Slavery was ended by Wilberforce and Douglass, and the women's rights movement and the suffragettes were the ones that got women to vote. It had nothing to do with government. Same with civil rights. And so this is what we're trying to get people to motivate, that each and every one of us, we have that ability. And also to look for the answers to these problems, because sometimes these problems seem impossible to solve. So what's the way to find a solution to an impossible problem? You have to find an impossible answer. And that, I think, is something that passion, imagination, and courage can achieve. As a good example, 1970, the very idea that Nelson Mandela would one day become president of South Africa was unthinkable and thus impossible. And yet the impossible became possible. And we should look at every situation like that, that the answers are there. We just have to find them.
And then there is the next generation as well. I mean, here we're seeing your son, Tiger. He's becoming a pirate very early on. Do you think that kids are actually growing up with a total different relationship to nature if we let them?
If we let them, I think that children have a natural intuition as to what our role is in nature. Children have answers. And sometimes I think that instead of teaching children, we should listen to them and encourage their imagination, encourage what they see as the connections. Children know a lot about nature. Ask them about dinosaurs, for example. They all seem to be fascinated with dinosaurs. When I was a child, there's two things that happened to me that made me realize just how the educational system doesn't really work. When I was very young, I cut up a map of the world and got punished for it. But what I did was I put the continents together and I said, I think this was all one continent one time. And of course, the answer was, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. You're just a kid. That's a stupid idea. Of course, it turned out to be true. I also said, I think dinosaurs were actually birds and I think they might have had feathers. And, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. You're just a kid. Well, that's what we should not be doing. When children come up with these ideas, we should encourage those ideas, even if they're fantastic, even if they're just indulging their imagination. When my son says he talks to the black bear that lives near here, and okay, so he talks to black bear, I believe him. I'm sure he's having a great conversation, because that's imagination that we're talking about. So I think that's what the answer to what we do for educating children is really to work with them and work with their imagination and their intuition.
So there's a lot of room right now for imagination, us being all confined, us all sitting like at home, or at least in places where we shouldn't meet our neighbors. Do you think that the COVID-19, the lockdown right now, is contributing to a mind shift, is contributing to us learning to see our relationship to nature differently and learning to collaborate with nature? Or how do you see that whole moment in time and its effect on the future and our relationship with nature?
COVID-19 has put an end to normal, and it's the beginning of what I've been saying is going to happen for many, many years. It's nature is going to strike back. You can only cause so much damage without suffering the consequences, the ramifications. And for years, we've been saying that one of those consequences is the emergence of novel viruses, zoonotic transmission of viruses being released from the permafrost that have been dormant for 40, 50,000 years. So this is one of the problems associated with climate change, and we're going to see more in that. So it's also more severe storms, rising sea levels, all of these things together. We're going to have to change the way we view our relationship with the natural world. And one of the ways to do that is we have to toss off our anthropocentric values, this idea that we're the center of everything, that we're all important. And we have to adopt the biocentric perspective, meaning we're part of everything and we're interdependent with all other species. We need these species. Not all of them need us, but we need them. We can't live on a planet without bees and worms and trees, and we need them. They're ecologically important. And but we've had this attitude that we don't need them, that we live in this delusion that we are the center of creation, that we've invented. Every single religion in the world is anthropocentric, and every single religion puts humans at the center, and that is wrong. It's not correct. And so we really have to take this biocentric viewpoint where we live interdependently and in harmony with all other species.
But you also have your own experiences when it comes to viruses, but it's like in a different context. It's like with salmon, right? I mean, a lot of people would think, oh, I'm actually eating sustainable food. Sustainable fishing is like a big word now. But then on the other hand, it's again still killing life. On the other side, these fish farms are not really so healthy, neither for nature, not for us. You discovered a lot of like nasty little creatures in them with that Operation Virus Hunter, correct?
We've been doing Operation Virus Hunter for 6 years, and that's the studying and researching the transmission of viruses from domestic salmon farms, the Atlantic salmon species, to 7 indigenous salmon species on the Pacific and the West Coast. And where you have this high concentration of Atlantic salmon, which is a vector for many diseases and parasites, and they escape. Those viruses, those parasites escape into the ecosystem, affecting wild salmon populations. Everything from salmon lice, which are extremely destructive to the wild salmon populations, to the chemicals that they put in to control the lice and to control the viruses. These chemicals then have a very detrimental effect on the outside. Anytime you have a high concentration, like almost like it's a concentration camp situation with so many animals, whether it be chickens or whether it be salmon and everything, you're going to create diseases, pathogens that are going to come in there. I don't think most people understand the true nature of viruses, what they are. There are literally billions of types of viruses. Every single plant and animal has one or more viruses associated with them. And it's a good thing, because these viruses do a lot of good things for all of us. They help us digest the food, but most importantly, they control pathogens. If you look at a pathogen as a bacterium that has become a psychopathic. It's a psychopathic bacterium. It means it's going to kill you. And that one of the things that stops them are viruses. Viruses protect their hosts from that. A virus does not want to kill its host. It's not in the interest of a virus to kill a host. It's really funny to talk about because they don't have minds. They're not a conscious entity. They're not even, nobody's even sure whether they're alive or dead, really. They're just sort of like DNA, RNA out there. But the virus does not want to kill its host. It has to coexist. Now, what happens with a zoonotic transmission, that is when it goes from one species to another, it's got a new host. And here's the problem. With the diminishment of so many species, those viruses associated with those diminished species need new hosts, and 8 billion human beings is a pretty attractive pool to jump in. And so with zoonotic transmission on there, the host now has to learn to live with the virus. And a lot of the hosts are going to die until that coexistence has been achieved. Look at,
so the virus jumps pretty much from one species that can actually deal with them to another that can't. That's pretty much
like the common cold came from horses. Flu came from birds. It came from chickens. Flu came from pigs. It's our close association with these species that has brought those viruses into us on that. Now, then you have taken from the wild, whether it be monkeys, which brought us Ebola, or from the bats, the kind of pathogens or viruses associated with bats. It's not the fault of those animals. It's our fault. Because we're, these wet markets we bring in there, all sorts of filth in these places. And by the way, in New York City has numbers of wet markets. And
down in Chinatown.
Yeah, and it's amazing that this is tolerated. But at the same time, the other kind of wet market that we don't really think about are the slaughterhouses, and the chicken farms and the factory farms and all of these things. These are wet markets. Really.
Same stress on an amount of animals that actually don't belong in such a intense confinement.
We kill 65 billion of them every year, and that's not counting the fishes. We're just talking about chickens of whatever. 65 billion. That's a lot of slaughter, a lot of waste.
A lot of killing.
Pig manure is one of the major pollutants in the United States. Major pollutant in groundwater. You have dead zones in the ocean caused by this incredible runoff on that. So. We really have to learn that. So that's why I'm saying that normal is no longer going to be normal. Because if we don't learn how to live in harmony with these other species and live within accordance to the basic laws of ecology, diversity, interdependence, and finite resources, then we're going to see more and more of this, more emerging viruses and more climate change consequences.
So what can people do right now to protect themselves? And also, and I think more important, we know all these things, we shouldn't drink Clorox and so on, but what can they do to prepare themselves for the future? What is the mindset that everybody should right now in this time where we actually have time, the gift of time, where we should work towards?
Well, Harry Truman once said, the one thing that we don't know is everything that we've forgotten, which is, to learn from history. We have this has all happened before. In 1918 with the flu pandemic and the killing of 50 million people by that particular thing. And we're seeing the same mistakes being made as we made in 1918. They thought they had it under control. And then everybody decided to have a big party and all go out and, in Philadelphia, places like this. And what happened? Bang, second wave comes in, which killed even more people than the first wave. So this could happen. Now, certainly it's causing a lot of economic hardships and everything, but that's just a harbinger of what's going to happen in the future. You're going to see ecological collapse, and that's going to make this look like quite a pleasant experience.
we
got to change. What we have to do is change. We have to change how we live within the context of the ecosystem that we're in. We have to live in harmony with all those other species.
I'm an optimist, Paul, and I think that we're not stupid enough to kill ourselves. And we have been like superheroes in survival, it's a lot of people now. But
I don't know if it's stupid. I've always described human beings as overly conceited naked apes who are divine legends in their own mind. We think we're better than everything else, and we're
arrogance,
not.
Pure arrogance, and probably there is probably some dumb aspect to that because we just can't read and understand what is surrounding us, but had millions of years to be even here and allow us to be here.
I call Homo sapiens Homo ignoramus arrogantus.
What is the one thing everybody can do to give the oceans a break?
Well, there's a lot of things, but one
The
thing,
first, second, and third.
put an end. The most important thing is to shut down industrialized commercial fishing.
That means don't eat fish anymore.
Don't eat, well, people are going to eat fish because, off of Africa, a lot of people depend on it, but we got to shut down the industrialized commercial operations, the heavy gear technologies, the trawlers, the draggers, the purse seiners, and everything. There's 4 million fishing vessels out of there, and 40% of them are illegal. And we have to shut down illegal fishing. We have to shut down unregulated fishing. We have to shut down overfishing. All of that has to be done.
But in order to simplify that for everybody who's watching now, yes, if you have nothing else to eat than fish and your parents or yourself, you're catching it, that's a different story. But if you do live in a city and you do have options, there's no reason to eat fish right now. So I think everybody who can give these animals a break is just a hero.
Well, the other thing to keep in mind is even when you're not eating fish, you're eating fish. Because a good 35% of all of the fish that's caught is fed to pigs and chickens. So when you eat a chicken, you're eating a fish. When you eat a pork, you're eating.
Don't eat fish. Don't eat meat.
Well, we're going to have to cut down on that. That's for sure. Because there's too many people and not enough of everything else. Is really what it comes down to. It's the law of finite resources that we're stealing carrying capacity from other species. And as we steal that carrying capacity, we diminish their numbers. We diminish their habitat, and that translates into diminishing our own survival.
But there is a fantastic development right now when it comes to alternatives. I mean, you can easily live on plant-based diet without giving away anything, and actually not even sacrificing these moments, these cultural moments of barbecue and whatever. You just put some plant-based stuff on your grill if you really need to grill. But I think that's a good start, right? I mean, we would make a big impact.
If you look at any science fiction movies, whether it be Star Trek or whatever, it's all meatless diets, So that is the future. I actually met with a chef, a very famous French chef in France, and he cooks everything. But he actually said to me, he says, the future really is in vegan cuisine. And he said that's where everything is going to be going. It's actually more difficult, it's more complex, and there are certainly more diversity. And
even if you don't care about the animals, which is hard to imagine, but even if you don't care about the animals out there, if you just think about yourself, the plant-based diets that are out there that you can actually pick and decide for, they're actually very good for your health. I mean, there is a lot of improvement when it comes to health, and there's a lot of danger actually in eating wildlife.
Well, there certainly is, yes, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons that we've been encouraging veganism on our ships for, 30 years.
Paul, what a Sunday treat.
Oh,
I hope you're fine up there and you're safe and got that virus on check.
Well, I'm in Vermont. Yeah, I'm in Vermont. You're in New York, so you're the one who should be concerned.
Eye of the storm.
Self-isolation here in Vermont is pretty easy. I mean, my neighbors, I got a black bear and some chipmunks and turkeys, and so I'm not concerned about catching anything from them. They're pretty good neighbors.
Yeah, here it's super silent, and we actually hear birds now, and it's very rare that you hear a siren or cars driving by. It's surprising. I'm not sure if I can ever stand if the noise is coming back. So, thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody who's watching, and there's a lot to think. There's like 3 films to watch. One big mission, like go vegan. Try it, even if you just reduce your meal drastically, step by step. But I think, honestly, once you went down the plant-based path, you don't want to ever go back. You will just be not even able to smell it anymore. It's just this one switch that you have to flip. But
we have another film coming out later this year called Seaspiracy, which is to the ocean what Cowspiracy was.
So, 4 amazing films: Seaspiracy, Watson, Chasing Thunder, Ocean Warriors, and I'm missing out on one.
We also have Conserve, Defend, Protect about our campaigns down the Southern Ocean that was released this year too.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.